Welcome to With Creative Company,
a podcast where we dive deep in all things business as creatives.
We give our personal take on things that actually move the needle,
and also chat with entrepreneurs about their experiences in running a business.
I'm Jordan.
I'm Mayme.
Let's get creative. Welcome. What's our topic today, Mayme?
Today we're talking about how do businesses price their worth?
Dun, dun, dun.
Because I feel like that's like a phrase you hear all the time.
Yeah.
And until you truly think about it, it's just kind of like, I don't know, like the words that you hear from Charlie Brown's parents in the background of cartoons. Like, what does that mean? I don't know. So I think we're going to discuss that today.
Super important because it's kind of what defines you as a business too.
Yeah, I guess
charging money
true.
for things.
I was like, how does that define you as a business?
You make money.
Yes. So even if you're an artist, you're not a business owner unless you were making money. That's true.
That's true.
Yeah, you know what is funny is that for a long time I would get really mad when I was like in high school and then a little after because people would try to call me a professional photographer.
Ooh.
And it would make me angry because
Oh.
I was like, the only way you're a professional at something is if it's your primary income.
Oh.
And I'm not there yet. And I want to save that for when I get there.
So you've arrived.
I have arrived, but like, it's not as cool as I thought it would be, but I saved it for a long time.
I feel you. I feel like I was the opposite. I was like, well, please, somebody call me a professional photographer.
Really?
Yeah.
That is so funny.
That's great. That's great. So obviously we wanted to talk about pricing yourself as a creative, which is not always a small business. Obviously there can be some large businesses, but I think we'll be able to speak probably a little bit better about smaller business pricing and kind of being in that creative industry because it is hard. I think as a creative or as an artist, sometimes people don't necessarily understand what that all entails, especially when you're delivering a product. But
or when you're delivering a service.
Yeah.
That I think is really hard for people sometimes to like wrap their head around your pricing.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start with this then?
I think we could like do a little ping pong. I can do one, you can do one.
Okay.
Things like that.
That works.
Great. You start first because you had a really good one.
Okay. I personally think that a good place to start when you're a business owner that a lot of people don't do, especially myself early on, is that you need to know the amount of money that you need to make per year with your business. So whether that's part-time and you just have like, this isn't going to be worthwhile to me unless I'm making $10,000 a year, which is a really reasonable place to be if that's like a season of life that you're in.
Yeah.
But it could also be, I want to go full-time this year and here's what my life expenses look like. So I need to make X amount of money in order to meet all those expenses, plus a few coffee runs.
Right. Target.
And then from there, we can go on to our calculations that are, okay, but we have to take out taxes and savings, which I think we'll address a little later in the episode. So really that number is going to have to increase more.
Yeah.
At least by 30 or 40%.
Yeah.
And if you can start there and you can see that number, sometimes it looks massive. But in my experience, just writing that down and knowing what it was allowed me to then do that. Versus if I had never written it down and I was just winging it.
Yeah.
I was never going to get anywhere.
Well, you might get somewhere, but it may not be where you want to be.
That's 100% correct. Yes. And so from there, then you're going to break down, like, do I want to do, like, I'm not going to use a photography example because I feel like we're hitting those really hard.
Yeah.
If you're a painter and you're like, I want to do mostly print sales, then you need to price your prints in a way that will allow you to sell a certain amount per month to meet those numbers. And then if you are going to want to sell mostly original paintings, then you have to price those in a way that will let you meet those numbers, but also meet like your time ability.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we make this mistake of writing down our ideal income first. And I think we need to start as business owners with like, can I make ends meet? Can I do this? And then you increase from there. You don't start out being a millionaire who's selling every single painting
Right.
for $3,000. Like, that's just not always reasonable.
Yeah.
It might be worth that, but it's not necessarily reasonable if you want to make your ends meet selling at markets from like the very beginning.
Yeah.
Or like for me in photography, it's like if I want to shoot mostly sessions, my session pricing needs to reflect the majority of my income.
Yeah.
Or if I want to shoot mostly weddings, then
Yeah.
I've got to break that down with how many weddings do I want to shoot per year? Do I want to shoot 50? Do I want to shoot 12?
Yeah.
And then you're going to have much more tangible numbers that you can look at that make sense for you.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to start because, like you said, it's the overall of year. Hey, how much money do I need to make to live, to eat, to have a roof over your head, all the things. I think something that does go along with that you mentioned is talking about taxes. As a business owner, you are going to be in charge of making sure you either pay into your taxes quarterly or saving for your taxes at the end of the year. I know everybody has their own way of doing it, but those are the two that I've found that
I do it the bad way.
What's the bad way?
I don't pay quarterly. I
don't pay quarterly either.
I think it's more stress. We've talked about this before. I do anything to lessen my stress when it comes to accounting.
Yeah.
And even though there's a fee at the end, which I've heard is increasing, so I might have to change my...
Maybe. Because I know it's not crazy much.
I might have to change my life method. But
Right.
For me currently, I feel like it's much easier to do that math throughout the year of just saving the money and then paying it at the end.
Yeah. Well, and then too, if you're smart, you can put it in a high yield savings account and you can make more money off of that. That's why I want to keep my money.
Oh, that sounds like something that you do.
Yes.
That's awesome.
I try to be smart. I'm not super smart. My husband is super smart. He's listening to this, so thank you. But yeah, taking into consideration taxes, I think at least for us, we do 25%. But we also do tithe. So that is a 10% off of our, income that we make.
So do you tithe from payments versus your payments to yourself?
I tithe from my business.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I tithe from that. And then from there, we save 25% for taxes. And then, of course, you have to look at also your expenses. That whether that be yearly or monthly. It could also include if you have to hire somebody to help you with the job that you're hired to do. As photographers, obviously we have second shooters sometimes, or as graphic designers, you might need another input from, I don't know, a color palette person, or I don't know, anybody you could really imagine. Or if you're a painter and you're delivering a painting that's massive and you have to rent a U-Haul and maybe somebody to help you, or just all the things that are not fun to think about.
Yes. Well, and I think, honestly, I try to lean towards giving myself leaner payments to have excess on all that other stuff than having to be stressed about it month to month.
Yeah.
I never want to be in the slow season of my business and feel like I can't pay for all of the subscriptions and services and client management tools that I use. So I save 30% for taxes, which is a little high for what I need. But I can circle back to that in a second. And then I save about 20% for business expenses.
Yeah.
And then once the end of the year rolls around, whatever's left over from that 20% goes into my savings to be upcoming business purchases or unexpected expenses. So that kind of grows year over year, or it gets put towards a new piece of equipment. And then for my taxes, whatever's left over that I don't have to pay to the government, I split 50-50. And so some of that goes into that expense account. And then the other gets to be a little fun year-end bonus, which I always enjoy. Even though I know the money was there the whole time, it feels special, especially because January is super slow for photographers, but I assume all artists and creatives. So it's fun to have a little extra money then.
It is nice. We do the same. Any kind of leftover money we have, because I think sometimes people factor in maybe their expenses every month, which is totally fine, because if you need that money, then that's fine. You don't have to pay it in, whatever. But it is nice to have that little check of oh, this is nice in January when we have no business, or whenever your slow season is. It's really, really nice to have. So yeah, those are super important. Back to you.
So one time I was having a conversation with a friend of my husband's like parents, and they were getting dinner with us, and he owns like a construction company,
Mm.
I think. Something like that.
Something.
And he was like asking me how long it took to edit each wedding that I did.
Mm.
And I did not have an answer. This
Yeah,
was a
that's
few years ago.
rough one.
Like I had no answer whatsoever for how long it took me to edit weddings, how long weddings took me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I suddenly realized like there's this fundamental part of business, which is knowing how much time and energy and expense you're putting into things, that I, as a creative, was just like frolicking through the field, totally ignoring. So I finally did that. I timed myself for my next several weddings, like my emails, my meetings, everything.
Wow.
And it was actually way more time than I had initially thought it would have been. And so that really affected the way that I priced my weddings. And I still don't maybe charge as much as a lot of people in this industry, but I had to increase my pricing because I was like, oh, I'm spending at least a full average like 40-hour work week on a wedding. And I was thinking I was spending maybe 20 hours, which is completely different.
Right. It is.
2 days of work versus like 5.
It is. And also too, I think creativity there's this balance. This is a different conversation, but there's a balance between creativity and being like burnt out, right? So if you have all of these projects and all of these commissions and all of these services that you have to do, but it's based on your creativity and your art form, where is the line of, well, I can't give anymore because I'm burnt out, or I can't do this anymore because I'm exhausted, or I can't, like, I feel like that's such an interesting conversation that maybe, again, isn't considered when someone's hired who maybe isn't a creative or doesn't understand artistic practices. But it's just it's another hard one to measure, let's say.
Yeah. No, I think sometimes we get stuck in this mindset. At least I do. I say we, but I'm really only talking about myself.
That's okay.
I get stuck in this mindset where I equate my business to being the same as like regular old corporate America, whatever. And it's not.
Yeah.
And I even have to be careful when I say things like, oh, this is a 40-hour work week, or oh, this is my hourly rate. I think we have to steer away from that because our industry of being an artist gives you such a gift of like flexibility, to where I don't necessarily think my time, if it's at night and I'm able to like listen to a podcast and do these other things, I feel like in some ways my time isn't worth an hourly rate in the same way that it would be if I was having to sit in an office, talk to coworkers I didn't like do all these different things. So I feel like we have to be careful with that because we get stuck in that headspace that you're talking about where it's like we're not equating the fact that this is still art and it's still creative. And it's not just a typical job. I will say I am sometimes baffled by the amount of workload people can take on. And I think you're going to burn yourself out when you do that. So if you have your pricing, it's like your minimum amount you need to make. I don't think right off the gate you're going to be able to be in that ideal situation of like, oh, I shoot 12 weddings a year.
Yeah.
Unless you have a really amazing portfolio and history, and also have an art form that takes a long time. Because if you're shooting 12 weddings a year, you're probably spending way more time on those weddings than like I am.
Yeah.
But I'm also really shocked when I'm talking to a photographer and they're shooting like 60 plus weddings a year. Because I just think that's not typically really manageable for people. And I think that puts them in a really hard place. Now, it could be that they're way more competent in like editing and such than I am.
And different business models, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Which is crazy to think about. But yeah, I think it's great. Okay, so we have looking at the amount of money you need to make per year, the cost of doing business, the cost of taxes, savings, your business expenses plus your real life expenses. But I think also another great place once you have those kind of at least written down in a ballpark is looking at the industry standard around you,
Yeah.
asking your peers. I think that a lot of people are scared to maybe ask their peers of what they charge or what they do or things like that. But at least in my experience, I've had nothing but
Mhm.
people being very, very open and honest about what they do and how much they charge and their
Whatever you
processes.
do,
Yeah.
do not inquire to another artist's website
Please do not.
as though you are a client
Please
to
do
get their
not.
pricing. That's incredibly rude.
Just ask them.
I've actually I'm from a relatively small town. All love to those people. But I live in Nashville and I'm like in a certain type of industry. And I've had in the past a couple people who have like directly copied my pricing from my website. And I'm like, I'm not a big enough person for you to be doing this. This is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. Don't be doing that.
You're like, for your sake.
But I always think that's kind of funny because I'm like, you have to be paying attention to the numbers there because my
Yeah.
numbers are different than yours are going to be. And my years in business are different.
Right.
I can't charge what other people charge. I'm not good enough, or I don't have enough repertoire. But I also can charge more than if you're just starting out in business. And it's not that your work isn't valuable when you're starting out, but I think sometimes in this like Instagram age, we frown upon the idea of like, oh, you shouldn't charge $50 for a photo session. And it's like, if you have one camera and a kit lens and you're starting out and you want to learn,
Right.
charge
Charge
$50. Do
Yeah.
it. Like that's $50 you didn't have.
Right.
And then as you improve, increase.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's just a little.
It's like cutting your teeth, as I like to call it. Have you never heard that?
I don't think I've ever heard that phrase.
I'm pretty sure that's right. Maybe somebody
No,
fact check me, but
maybe
I'm
it
pretty
is.
sure that's right.
Okay.
It's like cutting your teeth. It's like earning your stripes.
Oh, you know what? That makes way more sense. I wasn't thinking about teeth cutting through your gums. I was thinking about like my brain was going somewhere
That's okay.
else. Keep talking.
No worries.
Sorry.
You have a child.
Yeah, I do.
It's okay. It's all right.
Okay. So
But
earning your stripes.
Yeah, earning your stripes based on your experience, like you were saying. And I think I'll go back to photographers because that's what I know. But if there's a photographer out there who hasn't charged like $200 to $500 for their first wedding, like I've never met you, because that's just how it is. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. And like you were saying, yeah, like you've got to earn that.
Well, and I also think it's not you have to earn that in like you just have to go through it because we did way. It's in I charged $500 for my first wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't regret that. First of all, I didn't have the gear or the expertise. I had never even second shot a wedding before.
Okay.
But also, my anxiety would have been insane had I charged $2,000, which is already not as much maybe as you should be charging. But like, that would not have worked for me. Mm-hmm. And then I also would have had a client who expected a $2,000 wedding package.
Yeah.
And what I provided was a $500 wedding package. And, I think that's a good place to be. And yeah, so I'm just saying if you're starting out in business, maybe like don't frown upon the fact that you're starting out.
Yeah.
And that you have a lot of growth that can happen, but maybe won't happen in the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And I have to say this to myself as well, because I sometimes stunt myself and don't allow myself to grow. And I just like get stuck in a little category and I'm like, I'm comfortable right here.
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, I've got 3 more years of experience than I did when I wrote this down. Like this has to change. If that makes any sense.
No, it does. And I think that goes along with the last thing that I want to say, which is whatever your pricing ends up being, make sure that you believe it and that you're confident in it.
Yes.
Because if you aren't confident sharing your prices with somebody, they're not going to believe you. Mm-hmm. They're not going to think that you're worth that, right? That was a huge lesson I had to learn. And I think that's where I was. I was like, oh, I don't know if I can charge that much. I don't know if anybody's going to book me. Would I even pay that much? Would, all of these things that run through my head. And then you get on a call or you get in a meeting and then that reflects subconsciously sometimes, maybe even more so, But I think that is a huge lesson. It's like, yeah, whatever your pricing does end up being, believe in that full-heartedly. wholeheartedly.
No, yeah. I think sometimes we get kind of scared, like that we're not going to book everyone. And you're not going to.
Yeah, you're
We're
not.
not going to book everyone.
And that's okay. That's actually a good thing.
No, it's great. I couldn't book everyone. That'd
Yeah.
be terrible. So I'll circle back as we wrap up. I think the key parts of this that are more detail oriented for anyone who needs like a little bullet point list. You need to have an amount per year. You need to have like your monthly expenses. If that's part-time supplement income, that's going to be different than if you're a full-time person who's trying to pay all their bills and their kids' childcare and everything. So that has to be written down. And then from there, you need to be able to do the math of like 25 to 30% for taxes, 10 to 20%, whatever you think you need, maybe more for business expenses. Luckily, as service industry, we have to have less business expenses, which I think sometimes I get a little whiny over how little money I make, but it's like, I don't have to go buy fabric for every single project.
Right.
I have this one large investment and then I'm kind of comfy.
Yeah.
And then after that, you get paid. So like if it's me, I mean, if I'm 100% out there, I get 50% of anything that I'm ever booked. And I just feel like in the beginning, those things can be hard. They kind of feel gatekept away from you.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, because you get paid for a gig and you're like, "Ah, I'm rich. And then your credit card bill comes around and you're like, oh no.
and then I'm trying to think of any other. And then the other bullet point I think would be what you said, which is like you have to be confident in your pricing once you've got it. Because it's your livelihood and you're a business. You're not just a person. And if someone is coming to you and wanting to pay for your service, whether they decide to do that or not, they were interested in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's up to them what they decide to do from there.
Yeah. And if you need to ask for help, ask for help. I'm sure that there is somebody in your industry that has gone before you and that you admire. And I think that if you went to that person, they'd probably be honored that you were asking.
I think that's
Give you some
true.
tips.
Ooh, I'll add one more thing.
Ooh.
I know I said we were wrapping up, but I will add one more thing. I think there's a fun balance here that I don't have wisdom to answer correctly. But I think, especially when you're starting out as a business owner, you need to be careful about how quickly you expect to be full-time because it's really time-consuming.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, once you're doing okay, you have to be careful that you're not holding yourself back from going full-time. Me doing things like not writing down numbers and not keeping track of tangible information kept me away from being full-time because it limited the amount of work I was willing to put in. But at the same time, I'm glad that I didn't try to go full-time too quickly because it would have burnt me out and stressed me out way faster than just managing multiple things for a short period of time.
Yeah. That's great advice.
So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, that's all that we have for you this week.
I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.